Hi, I'm David Penn, research analyst with Finovate. We're here at FinovateEurope 2023 in London, England. And joining me now is Katharina Lüth. She is the Chief Client Officer and Managing Director with Raisin. Katharina, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I thought we'd start off at the top with tech trends and some of the things you might be seeing that are particularly catching your eye.
Yeah, so at the moment it's obviously a bit at everyone's top of mind, but AI and ChatGPT and the rapid involvement we're seeing there is definitely something that we're looking into, alongside obviously the larger macro developments, which is not so much a tech topic, but something that's definitely keeping everyone quite occupied at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that ChatGPT off the top of the conversation. I was remarking to someone else, it's kind of interesting how before this conference started, it was version 3, and the conference hasn't even ended, and we're already on a version 4 that's passing the bar exam and all these other crazy things. Are you confident that there will be applications with that kind of technology in financial services? People are still doing everything from writing limericks to everything else. Do you really see a role for that in financial services down the line?
So I clearly see a couple of areas where this can be relevant. So customer service for me is one. So we're already seeing a lot of use of chatbots, etc. And I think this is something where we can very clearly see where the next path in terms of evolution in this type of technology is, where it will allow customer service personnel to really focus on the more complex issues, whereas sort of the more standard cases, I think will very soon be able to handle with AI in one form or another. And I think another interesting area where we'll see is content marketing, right? Writing content articles, etc. It's at least an interesting area to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, certainly. One of the things I'm curious about also, we were talking a moment ago about the idea of Raisin as a fintech and what it's doing in the world. And I'm curious, when you're talking about attracting partnerships, attracting partners, people to work with, what are some of the things you think are most critical in that kind of relationship?
So the first thing that I believe is really important is that you find a win-win, and that you really find something where it's the priority of both parties to work on. So it's really difficult to work together, in particular with a larger institution, if what you're doing is priority 25 on their list. So you need alignment of interest and of priority, I believe.
And in terms of the kind of qualities that you look for in a partner, is it something that you could quantify in terms of either leadership, in terms of culture, that can say, okay, here's the kind of company we think we want to pursue a relationship with?
I think we actually pursue quite a number of broad relationships. So we're working with around 400 different financial institutions, all types of sizes, all types of cultures. I think what's important in the end is indeed that you find a mutually beneficial setup, and that you treat each other with respect, and really also keep in mind, how do we make this a mutually beneficial partnership?
Sure. I'm curious, what are some of the things that are particularly thorny? I know I was talking with some folks before, and they were talking about the importance of having leadership buy-in. They were talking about the importance of, if not having a cultural match, having a certain cultural compatibility, the idea, okay, we're different from you, but we understand that, and that's part of the reasons why we are working with you. Would you sort of agree that those are some of the key components, perhaps, that you want in a successful partnership?
Yes, definitely. So I think you need that understanding. Also, there's sometimes a component of different speed. So it's something where you need to understand each other, and both sides need to be willing to work with each other to manage those potential areas of clashes.
Right. I would also imagine that one of the thornier areas can be in the regulatory area. You sort of, on the one hand, have institutions that may be, you mentioned speed, slower moving, really have to sort of make sure they're ticking off the boxes. And then on the other hand, you have it's no longer fashionable to say it, but that move fast, break things kind of mentality. And I just think about the idea of trying to get those, in some respects, very different worlds to work together. And I'm curious about some of the challenges that are involved there.
Yeah, so obviously, indeed, it's finding a good balance. So I believe, in particular, fintech as sort of, if you want to be a fast mover, but if you want to work with a bank, you need to make sure you manage to do that within that regulatory framework, and to an extent that you can make the legal compliance and risk departments feel comfortable with it. And that could be via a pilot. There's a number of things that you can also do as a fintech, be it getting a license, having certain certifications in place. So you really need to work towards that, because in the end, if you do not get the compliance sign-off, it's not happening. So you need to work towards that.
Absolutely. We talked at the outset at some of the technological trends that you found particularly interesting, that the generative AI and the ChatGPT. Another one that almost now seems passé relative to those is things like open banking and open finance, which just a moment ago were taking everybody by storm at the promise of those. What are your thoughts about where we are in open banking and open finance, how that's progressing? How excited are you about some of the potentials there?
So in the end, I think we've come a long way because I believe open banking has really helped pushing institutions towards opening up and thinking about what are some of those use cases. So I think that has already been a massive cultural shift, just having that openness. I think there's still massive room on the road ahead to really thinking of some of the applications and some of the use cases for consumers. And also there still needs to be a lot of work done in terms of getting consumers comfortable with it, because I believe there's sometimes also still a certain amount of reluctance. In the end, you're talking about giving access to your financial data. Right. So people are quite conservative when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's one of those things that I think that people, once they stop and think about it, they might have concerns that they really hadn't had before. Once you sort of open up the opportunity that's there for them, there's this initial sense of, oh, fantastic, and then, wait a minute, my data, and so forth. And just that sort of education that has to come, that cultural willingness to understand that this is an opportunity for them as well. Would you say that it's still a little bit early in the evolution of the financial services relationship with open banking and finance for to start seeing things like impacts on revenue, to start seeing business models that are really based around those sort of models? Do you think that we're there yet, or that's still something that's sort of still developing?
So I think there are first cases, but I don't see it yet as sort of the big, massive case, right? So I think there is specific use cases also around some maybe niche target groups, etc. So I think definitely we are starting to see it, but I don't think we're at the end yet.
Right. I'm thinking also in terms of the customer expectations. I think that on the one hand, you have folks that now have to play a role by making that authorization, but certainly from the talk, the communication about this promise and things that people are going to be able to do you have a sense that sort of consumers of almost being of two minds, that on the one hand, they look forward to the opportunities, but at the same time, opportunities and responsibilities on the other? Do you think that's one of the challenges that consumers are facing?
Yeah, in the end, I mean, people are conservative when it comes to their finances, and it's still a business of trust, right? So you do have those early adopters that are happy to try out things, but not everyone is willing to sort of take that leap, in particular when it might be, for example, with a brand that they just don't know yet. Sometimes you also need a bit those externalities of a push. So Germany is traditionally very much a cash payment country, but COVID really pushed us to a different level in terms of mobile payments, just because you had sort of that external push forcing people to go out of their comfort zone ultimately.
That's a really good point, that a lot of the things, because the next question I was going to ask you had to do with the idea of what are the roles for banks, fintechs, financial services organizations, and helping customers feel more comfortable about that. But I think that the point that you just made a second ago about the idea that something completely exogenous to all of that, the pandemic, causing a lot of these social changes. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. But to the extent that banks and financial services can play a role in helping smooth the process for consumers, when do you think that's something that they should do? And if it is, do you have any idea of the sorts of things that they could be doing that might make it a little bit easier for customers?
Yes, I think indeed they should be doing it. In the end, it does take a long time though, because it's not just here's my new feature, but in the end it's consumer education. It's getting them to use it. And again, we're not talking about the early adopters, but we're talking about everyone else. And we've seen cases where, again, in Germany, traditionally, everyone had to go to the post office to identify for a direct bank. Now we have a video identification, which is a step better, but maybe not the end of it yet. And I'm sure we'll see another evolution step. We also have eID, which again is not broadly adopted yet. So I do believe there is ways where banks can really push consumers towards this.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you made about the idea of it's not just a matter of presenting a new feature. In a sense, the customer is the feature. So in a very weird way, you really are presenting them with something that's both novel and extremely intimate, and as you mentioned, extremely personal as well. I'm curious, you talked about Germany and its experience with cash and how that transition to digitalization there impacts payments, for example. And I'm curious in terms of that, what are some of the innovations in payments you think that might help accelerate that process even further?
So I think what I'm seeing, so I'm not a payments expert, but so I think indeed one is still the whole topic of mobile payment adoption, which we're I think still at the beginning of the journey to a certain extent. But what we're also seeing is more and more you have these, let's say, trusted payout solutions, right? Where you will ultimately take your payment provider of choice and just use them as your checkout process in a number of different online shops, which then again gives those shops additional trust. So I think that's one area where we're sort of still seeing a lot of room.
No, interesting, interesting. Well, we're running a little bit out of time for our session today, but I thought we might just sort of wrap up by talking just a little bit about Raisin. We haven't really talked about Raisin very much. I'm curious in terms of some of the things that people can expect to see from Raisin over the balance of 2023 and maybe even keeping into 2024.
Yeah. So indeed, maybe very quickly, what is Raisin? So we're a savings and investment marketplace. At the moment, the focus is a lot on the savings area, just because we have seen in the last 12 months in the UK and US, a bit longer, the first rate hike in a decade.
Right.
So people are coming back to those products and are obviously also choosing those products to combat inflation, at least to a certain extent.
Right.
So we are seeing a lot of activity in that area, and we're definitely working very heavily on getting consumers access to more of those products, additional features to make the journey more comfortable. So that's one area for us to focus on. We've been in the US for a while, but not that long. So that's obviously also very much an area of focus for us to grow that US business and make one of those cases where a continental European startup makes it on the other side of the pond, so to speak.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's something else for those of us in the States to look forward to.
Yes, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for spending a little bit of time talking with us about some of the things that are happening in FinTech, about some of the things that are happening with Raisin that we're definitely going to be looking forward to in the year to come.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you as well.